For most of his life, Jelly Roll looked like the kind of person country music was never supposed to turn into a superstar. Covered in tattoos, open about addiction, open about jail time, open about mistakes most celebrities spend their entire careers trying to hide. And for years, his life seemed to move in the exact opposite direction of fame. At certain points, survival felt more realistic than success. But somewhere along the way, millions of people started hearing something in Jelly Roll's music that felt impossible to fake. The pain. Not polished pain. Not carefully written radio pain. Real pain. Songs about addiction, regret, mental health, feeling lost, feeling broken. Trying to become a better person while carrying the weight of your past with you every single day. And in a music industry that often felt heavily manufactured, Jelly Roll became successful by telling people the truth about who he really was. No perfect image, no pretending, no hiding where he came from. And somehow, the artist who once felt completely outside the country music world became one of the genre's biggest stars. This is the story of the artists, songs, and moments shaping country music. This is CountryCurrent. Long before Jelly Roll became famous, he was growing up in Antioch, Tennessee, just outside of Nashville. But his childhood looked very different from the polished version of country music most people picture. Life around him was complicated. His father worked as a bookie and struggled with addiction. His mother dealt with mental health challenges. And from an early age, Jelly Roll grew up surrounded by instability, chaos, and difficult situations most kids never fully understand while they're living through them. And eventually, that environment started shaping his own life too. As a teenager, Jelly Roll got into trouble constantly. Drugs, fighting, crime. At certain points, jail had become such a normal part of his life that the idea of becoming successful probably felt almost impossible. But even during those years, music never completely disappeared. Hip-hop became an outlet first, a way to process emotions he didn't really know how to talk about anywhere else. And unlike a lot of artists early in their careers, Jelly Roll's music never sounded overly polished or carefully constructed. It sounded raw, messy, emotional, honest. At times, his songs felt more like conversations or confessions than traditional music. And maybe that's part of why people slowly started connecting with him in the first place. Because even before fame, Jelly Roll never really sounded like he was pretending to be somebody else. For a long time, music wasn't leading Jelly Roll toward country stardom. If anything, it started in a completely different world. Early in his career, Jelly Roll was mostly known for hip-hop, independent mixtapes, underground rap collaborations, songs that spread online through loyal fans who connected with the honesty in his lyrics long before mainstream audiences knew who he was. And even then, his music still felt different from a lot of artists around him. Because underneath the rap music, the emotion always sounded deeper than just performance. The pain felt real. The addiction struggles felt real. The loneliness felt real. At times, it sounded less like somebody trying to become famous, and more like somebody trying to survive his own life. And slowly, that honesty started building a loyal audience around him. Not because Jelly Roll fit neatly into one genre, but because people believed him. Over time, his music also started evolving. Country influences became more noticeable. Southern rock influences started blending into the sound. The storytelling became more personal and emotional. And maybe without fully realizing it at first, Jelly Roll was slowly creating the exact kind of music that would eventually connect with country audiences in a massive way. Because underneath all the genre labels, the themes in his music were already deeply connected to country storytelling. Struggle, pain, redemption, family, addiction, faith. The kinds of subjects country music has always connected to when they feel honest enough. But even as his audience slowly grew, mainstream success still felt very far away, especially in country music. Because on the surface, Jelly Roll still looked like somebody Nashville probably wouldn't fully accept. For years, Jelly Roll existed almost completely outside the mainstream music industry, especially outside of country music. He didn't look like the typical country star. He didn't sound like the typical country star. And honestly, most people probably never expected Nashville to fully embrace somebody like him. But somewhere along the way, something started changing. The emotional honesty in Jell Roll's music was connecting with more and more people far outside the rap world he originally came from. Fans who had struggled with addiction, mental health, loss, depression. People who felt like life had beaten them down at different points. And unlike a lot of artists, Jell Roll never tried pretending he had all the answers. That vulnerability became one of the biggest reasons his audience kept growing. Then came songs like Son of a Sinner, and suddenly, country music started paying attention in a completely different way. The song exploded, not because it sounded perfectly polished for country radio, but because it felt human. The lyrics sounded lived in, the pain sounded believable, and for a lot of listeners, Jell Roll suddenly felt like somebody bringing a level of emotional honesty into country music that they hadn't heard in a long time. Almost overnight, the artist who once felt completely outside the genre was becoming one of the most talked about new names in country music. Award show appearances started happening. Country radio support grew. Massive crowds began singing every word back to him. And maybe the most surprising part of all was how naturally Jell Roll fit into country music once people finally gave him a chance. Because underneath everything else, his music had always been built around storytelling. And storytelling has always been the heart of country music. As Jell Roll kept rising, one thing became impossible to ignore. This wasn't just another artist having a viral moment. Jell Roll was becoming a superstar. And maybe what made it feel so surprising to people inside the industry was that almost none of it followed the traditional path country music normally takes. He wasn't introduced as the next polished Nashville star. There was no perfectly managed image, no carefully scripted backstory. Fans already knew the flaws, the mistakes, the addiction struggles, the jail time. And somehow, that honesty became his greatest strength. Because for a lot of people listening to Jell Roll's music, the connection felt personal. His songs weren't about pretending life was perfect. They were about trying to survive when life isn't. And in an era where so much entertainment started feeling filtered and artificial, Jell Roll came across like somebody simply telling the truth. That connection turned into something massive. Concerts kept growing larger. Social media clips spread constantly online. Award show performances introduced him to entirely new audiences. And suddenly, Jell Roll wasn't just becoming popular with country fans anymore. He was becoming one of the most recognizable personalities in music. But maybe the most important part of his rise was the message behind it. Because for a lot of fans, Jell Roll's success started feeling bigger than music itself. It became proof that people can change, that your lowest moments don't always define your future forever, and that even somebody who once felt completely lost can still rebuild their life into something meaningful. That emotional connection is difficult for artists to create, but once they do, audiences never forget it. But as Jell Roll became one of the biggest stars in country music, the pressure surrounding him changed completely. Because becoming famous doesn't erase the past. If anything, sometimes it makes the past even more visible. Almost overnight, Jell Roll went from being an independent artist with a loyal audience to living under a level of attention that followed almost everything he did. Every interview, every speech, every social media clip, every emotional performance. Millions of people were suddenly watching him in real time. And unlike a lot of celebrities, Jell Roll never really tried pretending he had completely figured life out after becoming successful. He still talked openly about addiction, mental health, anxiety, the guilt and regret that can follow people long after they've changed their lives. And maybe that honesty became even more powerful once he reached mainstream success. Because fans weren't just connecting with Jell Roll as an artist anymore. They were connecting with him as a person. Someone who openly admitted he still struggled sometimes. Someone who talked about healing instead of pretending he had already become perfect. And in a world where so many celebrities carefully protect their image at all costs, Jell Roll continued building his career by being emotionally transparent in ways most public figures never are. That vulnerability became one of the biggest reasons his audience kept growing. Because for a lot of people listening to his music, Jell Roll didn't feel unreachable. He felt human. And once artists create that kind of emotional trust with an audience, it becomes far more powerful than just popularity. By the mid-2020s, Jelly Roll had become far more than just another successful country artist. He had become one of the defining personalities in modern country music. Not because he perfectly fit the traditional Nashville image, but because he completely broke away from it. For decades, country music stars were usually expected to look polished, controlled, carefully managed. Jelly Roll arrived looking like somebody country music wasn't even supposed to make famous. And somehow, that became exactly why people connected with him. Because underneath the tattoos, the rough past, and the unconventional image, fans saw somebody being emotionally honest in a way that felt rare. The music felt lived in. The stories felt believable. And at a time when audiences were constantly searching for authenticity, Jelly Roll suddenly became one of the clearest examples of it. At the same time, his rise also showed how much country music itself was changing. Streaming mattered more than ever. Social media mattered more than ever. Fans had more control over who became successful than traditional gatekeepers did, and artists who connected emotionally with audiences could suddenly build massive careers even if they didn't fit the old Nashville formula perfectly. Jelly Roll became one of the biggest examples of that shift. Because his rise didn't happen by following the traditional path into country music. It happened because millions of people saw something real in him before the industry fully understood what was happening. And maybe that's what makes his story feel so different from most country stars. Jelly Roll didn't become successful by pretending to have a perfect life. He became successful by being honest about how imperfect it actually was. Jelly Roll's story isn't really about somebody becoming famous the traditional way. If anything, it's the exact opposite. It's the story of somebody who spent years feeling like he existed completely outside the version of success people normally imagine. The arrests, the addiction, the jail cells. The feeling that life had already gone too far in the wrong direction to fully come back from. For a long time, Jelly Roll looked like somebody country music was never supposed to turn into a superstar. But somewhere along the way, millions of people connected with something in his music that felt impossible to fake. The honesty. Not honesty about success, honesty about pain, about failure, about regret, about trying to become a better person while still carrying the weight of your past every single day. And maybe that's why his rise connected with so many people emotionally, because Jelly Roll never came across like somebody pretending to have life completely figured out. He sounded like somebody still fighting through it in real time. And in an era where so much entertainment started feeling polished and carefully managed, that vulnerability became incredibly powerful. What started as an independent artist making music outside the mainstream eventually turned into sold-out arenas, award show performances, and one of the most unlikely success stories modern country music has ever seen. But in a lot of ways, Jelly Roll's story feels bigger than music now, because for a lot of fans, his rise became proof that people are capable of changing their lives no matter how far gone things once seemed. And maybe that's the real reason his story connected with millions of people. Not because Jelly Roll looked perfect, but because he never pretended to be. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe for more stories about the artists, songs, and moments shaping country music. This is CountryCurrent.